The link between violent videos and crime.
Research is taking place and it will show.
So-called video nasty.
These films not only affect young people,
My mum don't really let me, but I watch them when she's not in.
but I believe they affect dogs as well.
Knowing that children are likely to see
Caught up in the video nasty, scared.
Wave of moral outrage.
Films without certificates
on a list circulated by Scotland Yard
in our societies.
have been seized on video.
Blaming horror movies.
We don't believe in constraining the media.
Dearest band fans, I write to you from my desk, typing on a creaky 13-year-old Lenovo laptop, which the internet tells me has a second-hand price of £145. It is day 114 of my podcast project, an adaptation, or adaption, as I think the Americans like to put it, being ever so practical, of a website of the same name I first created around the Christmas of 2022. Progress is slow but steady. Food rations will last until the winter. Morale is high. I hope to reach the summit of the next weekly episode by nightfall on Sunday. The wreckage of my social life has been abandoned in the snow. I can hear wolves. I believe they're playing Stoke City at home. I've had to eat Ethan Hawke. He tasted of garlic. Julie Delpy's got a lot to answer for. More later. Hello, enough of that guff. Welcome once more, subscribers, thanks to you all, downloaders, an ever-growing bunch, and those who've just wandered in off the street looking for a distraction. Like a local modern suburban Methodist church, everyone is welcome here, no one is judged, but the pastor will expect you to dip in during the whip round, and there might be guitars and maybe a tambourine later. It's everyone's favourite weekly stop-off for the nastiest VHS reviews your browsing history can cope with. Let's get the band back together. A stomach-tumbling exploration of a musty box of unmarked cassettes discovered in the loft at the BBFC's office on Oxford Street. Over 100 mouldy items from the time when horror met home rental, and dozens of VHS tapes, both harmless and horrendous, were searched, scanned, sealed and dumped. At the bottom of the ocean, next to Davy Jones's locker, just near Michael Nesmith's sports kit. Considered by our elders to be too corrupting and depraved for the sensitive British public at the time. Last time, the cat had got our tongue, if by cat you mean a furious witchfinder Herbert Lom, and if by tongue, you still mean tongue, as we took apart 1970s West German piece of hexploitation in a sub-Vincent Price, what you might call discount price, effort, where the only thing more bloody and overblown was apparently the on-set relationship between the co-writers, Mark of the Devil.
I stand before the Saviour. He and the Blessed Mary are my witnesses. I'm innocent.
And what cassock-draped, crucifix-waving adventure that was. As colourful as 24 tins of Quality Street, and just as good for your complexion and gum health. Today, things are about to get serious. We say goodbye to silly splashes and slashes, farewell to period costumes, and there isn't a crazed scientist, doctor, caterer, Nazi, bishop, or talking frog in sight. What is in sight, however, as we will discover, discuss, and dissect, is 113 blood-soaked minutes of moss, machismo, mammaries, and mayhem that led the critic of no less a journal than the Washington Post to say he would have walked out of it if he hadn't been paid to review it. Yes, part one of our two-part special, so much to say, so much to consider. It's 1971's rural home invasion rampage, Straw Dogs. Here's the trailer.
Okay, you've had your fun. I'll give you one more chance. And if you don't clear out now, there'll be real trouble.
This is David Sumner. All his life he's been running away, turning his back on trouble, involvement, and confrontation. Until now. He took his wife and fled to an English country town. He thought he could find peace and refuge. Instead, he found that a man can't hide forever.
I will not allow violence against this house.
Sam Peckinpahs, who uncaged the Wild Bunch, now unleashes Dustin Hoffman in Straw Dogs. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent.
Blimey! There is so much to talk about here. In this, though, part one, we'll go through the setup, the plot, the events, and outcomes. As usual, of course, for those who've both not seen the film, a shame, but then do have the thrill, of course, of discovering it anew. very jealous. Part 2 to follow, we'll take our time and lift the grotty lid and discover why this otherwise straightforward good versus bad British countryside thriller with that old tourists versus locals setup caused the headlines and headaches that have become its eternal legacy. Based on the exploitation novel by author Gordon M. Williams, The Siege of Trencher's Farm, Williams' literary agent, a guy called George Greenfield, approached the infamous Roman Polanski to maybe direct a big screen adaptation, but with Polanski proving unavailable, I don't know what or who he was doing, and I'm certainly not going to look it up, it fell instead in the lap of director Sam Peckinpah, who was coming off a decade of westerns he'd both directed and often scripted. For most, the high point on Peckinpah's list was his explosive hit The Wild Bunch, which blew holes in movie screens at the end of the 1960s and, with its extraordinarily relentless cowboy violence, has hung about history ever since, appearing in almost every 100 Greatest Evers lists ever since.
He still had a principle or two.
We're not getting rid of anybody. We're gonna stick together just like it used to be. When you side with a man, you stay with him, and if you can't do that, you're like some animal. You're finished.
Greatest western ever, greatest movie ever, greatest action scenes, greatest score, and so on. Now, we're going to talk later about how Peckinpah and his co-writer David Logan's Run Goodman,
but in the 23rd century, life lasts 30 years. Not one day less, not one day more.
Approached Gordon Williams' novel, but suffice to say, neither thought this novel, written apparently over just 9 days, was up to much literature-wise. Producer Daniel Melnick has Straw Dogs on his CV as his first production feature film, but he was far from a rookie in the art of the Hollywood deal, as he had been exec producer in television and on Broadway throughout the 1960s. Melnick pulled in Dutch director of photography John Coquillon, who, in a nod to last week's episode, was the man also behind the camera on Witchfinder General, so he knew how to light pastoral fields and focus on hay bales and livestock in order to just catch the evening light as it glints off blood, bone and carnage. In the editing suite of the movie, running about, sharpening the razor blades, making the coffee and learning the ropes, was future Bond director Roger Spottiswoode, who, learning from this how Peckinpah shot action, violence, mayhem and chaos, was inspired to bring this technique to the glorious, relentless, bloodletting gore of... hold on, I've got it here somewhere. Of Stop or My Mum Will Shoot, starring Estelle Getty.
Witnessed a murder.
Get him! We're gonna nail those turkeys!
Oh, come on, Gwen. She's supposed to go back one day.
Watch out!
Music was courtesy of Jerry Fielding, who'd provided Peckinpah with his score for The Wild Bunch 18 months before. The stunts, and there were lots of stunts, came from a team led by a guy called Billy Cornelius, who pretty much had been getting punched, shot, crashed and thrown out of windows on British screens, big and small, for the past decade, and would happily continue to do so for a decade more after this. And if the special effects look particularly special, thank producer Melnick for hiring legend John Richardson.
There's always a slight tension in the room until I address the cardigan.
Not that one. Who went on to have his explosive fingerprints all over future James Bond and Harry Potter later in his career. 6 points to Hufflepuff! On screen, well, the lead role of the academic-turned-action hero, the mediocrity-turned-militia, was put out to many a Hollywood star for this. Elliot Gould was offered, Beau Bridges, Stacey Keach, Jack Nicholson and even Sidney Poitier.
Motherfuckers mess with me, I'll split your head!
All had their 10x8s pinned up on Melnick's corkboard at one point, but the part eventually went to a young 30-year-old actor called Dustin Hoffman, who'd arrived as the preppy Ben Braddock in 1967's hipster hit The Graduate and picked up an Oscar nomination. To play his wife, Hoffman petitioned for a female lead at an age near his own, saying the character wouldn't marry a Lolita-ish girl. However, although being Dustin Hoffman, he wasn't yet Hollywood legend Dustin Hoffman, so he lost out to Peckinpah's choice as director, the then unknown Susan George. That's Mrs. Manimal to you. Having just the look of coquettish innocence he needed, young George won out over other starry considerations such as Jacqueline Bisset, Diana Rigg, Helen Mirren, Charlotte Rampling, and even Hayley Mills.
It's my mother, but it's my mother too.
George, of course, was one of the young Bolton girls, in case you care, being made to eat herring in that James Mason clip of Spring and Port Wine, which we enjoyed playing last week, of course.
And I shall be played by James Mason in the film.
I'm sure you remember. To give some gritty, grimy authenticity to the cast of lads, layabouts, labourers and thuggish inbred yokels, Melnick and casting director Miriam Brickman assembled honest-faced, weather-worn character actors, took away their toothpaste and dressed them all in ratty wool and shit-stained breeches. Familiar faces to anyone who watched anything in the 80s will be Peter Vaughan, T.P. McKenna, Del Henney, and two uncredited legends, David "The Omen" Warner, watch for that van, David, and June "Cotton" Brown, watch for that laundromat, Dot. And you can also spot Colin "The British Are Coming" Welland, playing the Reverend. Finally, and I know I've been stalling long enough because believe me, when we get there, and if you don't know what to expect, you're going to find this VHS pretty alarming, and we're all going to need a cup of tea and a shower and a bit of a sit down afterwards. It hit UK cinemas in November of 1971. Now, those who looked at it and didn't fancy seeing Bill Sykes from the 1962 Oliver Twist TV dramatisation get beaten to shit by some nerd from The Graduate,
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
could have spent their shillings instead on Monty Python's big screen best of compilation, and now for something completely different.
How did he defend yourself against a man armed with a banana? Catch!
Gene Wilder's terrifying confectioner, The Mars Murderers, aka Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day.
Or the film that isn't Mary Poppins. Which, yes, can be said of almost every film ever made, but this one really isn't Mary Poppins, the daft Disney dreamscape of bedknobs and broomsticks out at the same time.
Here she comes, in the most enchanting role of her career.
You're not suggesting that I should take these children into my house. Exactly.
The incomparable Angela Lansbury.
So here we go then. There's no getting round it. It's off to the countryside with us. Double lock the front door as always. Lights out. Grab a cushion to hide behind. Get within half an acre of a jugged pint of warm home brew. Sharpen your mantrap. Load a shotgun. And let's go. With 1971's Straw Dogs. Right then, band fans, first up, let's lay out our stall. What we have here is one of the most notorious, controversial, bloodthirsty, you might say, or just downright problematic motion pictures of that decade. What could have been a taut, bare-bones, simple home invasion shocker, where Hicks meet liberals, has gone on to be still discussed, pored over, debated, dismissed and championed over 50 years later. The film itself opens in the British countryside, familiar to us all via the BBC or PBS from chocolate boxes and period dramas and mumsy Sunday evening detective shows about clumsy, sleuthing vets and doddery vicars. We know where we are. However, there's a lack of chintz, a lack of soft focus, there's no red roses around the door on these heaths. It's grubby, it's soiled, dirty fingernails, wet wool, broken Land Rovers and ratty scarecrows. Much more Wurzel Gummidge than All Creatures Great and Small. The sort of damp, bleak rural backwater full of misfits and suspicion that folk who grew up shivering and snotty on nettle-filled campsites in 1970s school holidays will certainly recognise. But what is this? Hark! A roaring through the narrow glades and putting cows off their milk. It's American mathematician David Sumner, and he's arrived in his just a bit too flashy sports car, an early pre-production Triumph Stag, with his young, perky and oh so wholesome wife, Amy, all Aran sweaters and roll-ups. Note, there's no rear-view mirror in this particular car. Now, film students can write about whether this was just a sign of an early unfinished prototype vehicle, or is it a man who's leaving the past behind him and not looking back? Start your essays now. It's Cornwall, the furthest of the far west coasts, about as far from civilization as you can get on 2 tanks of petrol. It's a small, small village. The pair are here to spend some time. Now, at this stage, we're not sure how long, a weekend, a year. They do have big trucks behind them delivering belongings and such, so it's not just an overnight stay, certainly. But as they drive, toot-tooting through the village, all duck ponds, old farm equipment and stonework cottages, the nosy locals, having apparently little more to do than nurse warm pints of bitter and tinker with rusty engines, begin to take an interest in this invading couple. I mean, no one says, "Arr, we don't get many strangers in these here parts," or indeed say, "We didn't burn him." But from the angle of their bobble hats and the bob of their briar pipes, it's pretty clear that this is a novelty, and not necessarily a welcome one. But what is this? Recognition? Some remarks? A bit of excitement? Amy, it seems, is a familiar face. From reactions, flirts and forelock tugging, it seems all the men know Amy. We get those nudges, lip-licking, and the sort of mumbled innuendo that I know many young women find very flattering. These are the farmhands and labourers that we're going to be spending some time with later. Countrymen, country ways. Norman, Chris, Phil and Charlie, the main man. Not men you mess with.
Spoken like a true man.
Oh, and they all remember Amy. For this sweet blue-eyed bombshell is a local from way back who has long since brushed off the dust of this dirty small Cornish town from her suede boots and gone off to better herself in the USA. As she and her nerdy husband stop and say hello, we discover Amy is now something of a small-screen TV star. All the locals flittering and fluttering about her. Hasn't she grown? Isn't she beautiful? Our Amy. The snotty, snarly menfolk, meanwhile, titter and gawp and make filthy remarks from behind their dimpling pint jugs. Oh yeah, they remember Amy all right. And it looks like they're quite keen to get reacquainted. In fact, very keen. In fact, very reacquainted. And this guy with her, he's not a threat. They're not going to let some nerdy Jewish American academic stand in the way of, well, you know, what's rightfully theirs. Let's pause. I hope you're getting the vibe here. You know that warm, cottagey, homespun, cosy loveliness of The Holiday when Cameron Diaz arrives in a Beatrix Pottery little village? You know that? And it's all homemade jam, isn't it? And blackberry wine? Yeah. It's nothing, fucking nothing like that at all. Rural, backwoods England shows its teeth, and it hasn't flossed since the Nixon administration. This is the countryside of barbed wire, of shotguns, of crows and cow shit. Prison tattoos on warty knuckles in fingerless gloves. Sorry, I think I'm going a bit too far here. I'm from London. I identify with Hoffman in this very much. It's too quiet. There are noises and ways, country ways. People out there have ways, and they never tell you what they are when you visit. They just laugh and call you soft when you inevitably get it wrong. Wow, I'm having my own little therapy session here. Enough. Plenty of time to dissect all this later. We watch then as the little open-top car pulls up to their new home, boxes and bags and hustle, and David and Amy do their best to settle into the old Trenchers farm, a sturdy house and a few acres and outbuildings up on the hill. A white, stone, solid but drafty sort of a place. Big iron bolts, you get the idea. There's a big grubby Belfast sink. There's probably a boot room, ratty rugs, that sort of thing. It's full of overstuffed furniture, copper pots on the wall, creaky pipes, and it's just a bit damp. David, it seems, a sporty but slight mathematician, sort of corduroy jackets and leather elbows, has come to the quiet of Cornwall, his wife Amy's childhood home, to write, to work and study. However, no, conversations between the lovers suggests they're not so much holidaying and relaxing in this part of the world as running away from their part of the world. This is, after all, the 70s.
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. Here are the latest developments affecting the fate of 180 or so American and other hostages.
Eric Severide in Washington.
The US was a time of Watergate and assassinations. It was all Vietnam, protests and placards, civil rights disturbances, unrest, riots on campuses. So, what's going on? Is David hiding from confrontation? Has he done wrong somehow back home? Is he scared of the politics of taking a stand? Maybe having his comfy, cosy academic life disrupted by campus violence and face paints and tenure committee protests. We can't really be sure. The script leaves it hanging nicely, but we get that sense. David doesn't seem proud to have left. There's a feeling somehow in the air of retreat, of hiding from the world, from his fears, from putting his bookish head above a parapet. He's laying low. He's staying out of something. We'll come to find out how Amy might be feeling about the coward in the corduroy that she's married, that this new farm life of feeding a single 5'6" chicken might not be the pastoral idyll she'd dreamt of as a girl. On the other end of the scale, our group of town locals, remember Norman and Chris, well, they're anything but backward in coming forward. The types perhaps to go looking for conflict rather than ducking it, or even maybe stirring up a little themselves. Fuck all else to do around here. It seems one of these outbuildings on the trencher's land, just to one side of the farmhouse, needs a new roof, and in advance of arriving, these two chaps, who you'd be unlikely to find with 5 stars on checkertrader.com, but you probably might stumble over, maybe dogging, in the car park of a Harvester's, have been hired by David to make these necessary repairs. In a bumpy truck and in a cloud of monoxide, shirt sleeves and dirty limericks, they arrive. Beer swigging, noisy, aggressive and bullying. They make themselves far, far too at home for David's liking, a little overly friendly and flirty to bashful Amy, and a little too eager just to walk in uninvited and to drink from David's fridge. Okay, so city boy David, more comfortable in the library or lab than on the terraces, isn't what you'd call brave, but he isn't stupid either. And he does what men like this often do. Better to join them than to beat them. Maybe he can get friendly, make a joke, even it up a little. Oh, but we do squirm as we watch David try and ingratiate himself with the leery locals. In the village's beamed pub, all low ceilings and bumpy plaster, he gets a welcome matched only by that of the slaughtered lamb in East Proctor. But at least there they might stretch to some sandwiches, a chess game and a warning.
Can't let them go. Should the world know our business? It's murder then murder it is.
In threatening silence, the workmen, the real men, with fingernails dirty from more than typewriter ribbon, and lessons learned from life, not from lectures, they openly despise bespectacled little David and his tweedy effeminacy, his wire glasses, look at his jumpers, and he's listening to Mozart and he's into maths. Poor David, he tries to buy their friendship, as people do, like trying to buy them drinks, but they don't want his money, and they won't be patronised by this city sap. David uses his street smarts and spots the power in the room. He's probably been fending off bullies like this like he was a bumbling George McFly his whole life, and knows to try and get the main guy in the gang on side. At the end of the bar, hunched and with a resting, absolutely moody cunt face, it's the gruff head of the town, the big guy, Tom. Grizzly, drunken, bear of a sad man, suspicious and hair-trigger, he has the weight of the world on his dusty shoulders. And on top of this, a young teenage daughter, Janice, older than her years, who is forever getting bored kicks from teasing and taunting Henry, the local village idiot, a shifty, lank-haired paedophile who sniffs and stares on the cobbled streets at dusk as innocents ring roses about him in school dresses. The local family men keep their kids at a distance and a very close eye on this Henry. He's a local problem with a local solution. Oh, by the way, BTW, as people say with their thumbs, for trivia fans, those dialing in from outside the UK today, or actually anyone born after about 1965, England was pre-decimal still at this time. Pounds and pennies and dividing things neatly by 10 would come the following year. So the talk you might be picking up at the bar of 30 bob was 30 shillings, which would become known as about £1.50 in the coming years. And until 1988, pubs like this were required to close mid-afternoon, by law, for at least 2 hours, sending the drunks into the streets to roll cigarettes and kill time until they just reopened the doors again to let them in at about 6 o'clock. A government plan to avoid idleness, one assumes, or more likely to allow the landlord to fumigate the place from a lunchtime of pickled eggs, pork scratchings and farts, and to allow 3 big guys to try and tip the spilling ashtrays into a nearby bin. Imagine that though, until Fatal Attraction and a fish called Wanda, you couldn't get a beer at 4 in the afternoon. What a country. Off-licence were clearly an absolute fucking goldmine. Back home, among the scrubbed pine tables and cobwebbed chamber pots, beautiful big-eyed Amy is bored. Perhaps the thrill of this older man, the flattery of the attentions of a college professor on campus are waning when there's no other girls to show off to. Trundling like an irritable teenager on a Sunday afternoon who's looking for any excuse not to do her homework, she scowls and slumps, leaving wine glasses and half-read magazines about the place. But David, sadly, just wants his blackboard, his quiet, his studies. Not that there isn't attention available elsewhere, of course, and any attention, even if it's from the calloused hands of the beery, leery workman, with whom she clearly shares a fumbling sexual past, perhaps, is better than no attention at all. While David sharpens pencils and scribbles applied mathematics equations about stellar structures into marbly notebooks, Amy is happy to seek, even to court, the locals' attentions. Flirting, coyness, maybe some cheeky flashing, and a little more flesh than expected will give her the cheers and leers she's been used to getting her whole life. Idle amusement, that's all, no harm. Probably just as it was when they were all kids. Flash your knickers a bit, cartwheels on the lawn, lollipops and a bit of a fumble. Where's the harm? And so it goes on. David waves away her buoyed pestering as he has to work. She undresses in front of open windows in full view, adjusts hems and stockings as she slides all lady-di coyness from the low seat of their triumph. To us, however, watching, she is knowingly or unknowingly overstepping the mark somewhat, as it's only too clear that the gruff and female-starved men on the roof want, and maybe even expect, more than pranks and girlish giggles. Work is slow going on the roof as the men, when they turn up at all, are more interested in bottles of beer in the sunshine and suggestive reminiscences with Amy. David, digging deep to find some semblance of the authority he may once have had at university, but is entirely without now in this world, tries his best to half-heartedly bargain with the men, to be reasonable with them. Reluctantly, they do agree to add some numbers to the workforce. Cue young Bobby from the village to help, and of course his older cousin, Charlie, an ex-serviceman, and an ex of Amy's. Hello, hello. Meanwhile, David is still trying to fit in as best he can, but he's an awkward fit. Small talk, and what would pass for educated conversation is clunky and fails to land, as he attempts one evening to bond with the, shall we say, better class of local people he's found, the simple country reverend and Major Scott, the magistrate, as they discuss an upcoming church social, and he does his best to fit in. A discussion between them of religion and science sees David's bookish misstep. Wearing his liberal brain on his sleeve, he drops an ill-timed quote. "Oh, there's never been a kingdom given to so much bloodshed as that of Christ's." Oh, go home, David. He doesn't belong. He doesn't fit here. And sorry about that impression, by the way. It was a lot more Jimmy Stewart, wasn't it? No. And the village seem not to want him to even try and fit. And that's, of course, their young girl that he's got in his house. Him and his liberal, godless American ways. David is left in no doubt about how they feel about him when he and Amy return one night to find their cat murdered. A written note is left and the feline's body hangs from a wire in the closet. Oh, he knows it's a signal from the men. Get out of town. But to admit this out loud would demand he had to take action, a face-off, a, God forbid, confrontation. David's terrified of anything like this and tries to pass off the slaughter of the pet as a prank. Local kids. Nothing to worry about, just horseplay, hijinks. For Amy, though, this is too much. Who is this man she's married? A timid little bookworm. He ran away, did he, from the politics and pressure on campus when he could have taken a stand. And now he won't even speak up when ill-educated men start pushing him around. Excuses and cowardice. We sense they've definitely had this fight before. But David has nowhere to turn. He's simply not self-assured enough. He's not got that masculinity that Amy admires and desires when faced with, let's say it, real men. Meanwhile, setting a vicious trap, the workmen continue to tease and taunt David in that "come on mate, only kidding around" manner about his manliness and his lack of machismo, but in the remarks runs a dark vein of threat, and you can see it in their eyes. It becomes too much, and they finally goad him into spending a day with them, as men do, drinking and hunting. Feeling pinned, cornered, and on the back foot, David unwisely agrees to join them. Hey, I don't know, maybe he can prove himself, flex a little muscle, maybe get on at least the same level with these guys. Maybe Amy might respect him more, or respect him a bit. Hell, maybe they'll finish the damned roof and leave him the fuck alone. However, we discover as they enter the woods the hunting plot is merely to get David away from his homestead, away from Amy's side. Her old flame from childhood and head of the workers, Charlie, arrives at the farmhouse. With that sneery animal rage disguised as overbearing boyish charm, he forces his way in and makes it frighteningly clear he will be having his way with Amy, whether she lets him or not. There follows some horribly clammy, cold exchanges. I won't put a clip in, but I'm going to take the edge off. I'll do it as if it was Zippy and George from Rainbow, okay? Just to sort of, soften it a little bit. Oh, remember when I took care of you, Amy? But you didn't, remember? Oh, there was once a time, Mrs. Sumner, when you were ready to beg me for it. Oh, keep your hands off me. You get the idea. So, at this horrible point, in a key moment, Charlie rapes Amy there on her couch, who it seems is too terrified to fight, too eager to get it over with, too fearful of a further beating, or perhaps simply frozen with fear. But it's this lack of obvious fighting and struggling that only encourages Charlie to believe her somewhat complicit, confusing matters even more. There is no confusion, however, when Norman, another of the workmen, arrives and, motioning at Charlie with a gun to hold her down, Amy is violently raped once more. David returns, miserable and humiliated, to the farmhouse, having been abandoned as a prank by the workers. Amy, trembling and shaken, says nothing of her ordeal, but is clearly hugely traumatised. But hell, why even tell her husband? What would this pathetic man possibly even do? The guy couldn't even defend their cat. It is somewhat broken now between them. But finally finding some courage, perhaps more from just despair and it being at the end of his tether from the bullying and the taunts, David ups and fires the workmen. The teasing, the taunting, just too much. He pays them off and sends them packing in an odd show of trembling bravery. But we know very well his hands are shaking in this false bravado. And these are not men, we know, to take this sort of condescending dismissal lightly. So here it comes. That night, at this church social they were agreeing on, Amy is frozen with fear to be face to face with her attackers, now all wolfen smiles and patronising piety in the church hall among their friends. Despite David perhaps wanting to hobnob a bit and try and up his status, Amy gets them to leave early and head home. Now, you'll remember Angry Tom in his hat from the pub. Well, his young daughter, we mentioned, Janice, bored and looking for distraction, finds Henry, the local oddball, and as much for cruelty, we feel, as amusement, takes his sweaty, wandering hand, and the two depart the church hall together into the night. Among the tombola raffles and hubbub, it takes a while for the men to realise Janice is gone, but when she doesn't answer to her call, the menfolk grow quickly into a spitting, violent lynch mob, almost as if it's what they've all been waiting for. Their coats are on, caps are pulled down, they're off to the pub for pints and spirits and Dutch courage. Rifles are loaded, cartridges pocketed, farm tools brandished. It's a tinderbox atmosphere of spitting vengeance. They will hunt down the evil paedophile in the night for fear of what he's done to Tom's daughter. In a panic, only now too aware of the disturbance and the lynch mob on his tail, befuddled Henry hides, smothering Janice to keep her silent for fear of being caught. However, the clumsy, panicked smothering turns to suffocation, and in a moment of tragedy, poor Henry realises he now has a dead girl in his arms, and nowhere to hide. Terrified of retribution, he makes a desperate run for it into the deathly darkness of the still country night, only to be blinded by the speeding headlights of David and Amy's returning car and knocked off his feet. Of course, having left early, unaware of the kidnapping, the death, or the approaching lynch mob, do the decent thing, the honourable thing, and feeling responsible for Henry's injuries, take him back to the farmhouse in the car. They'll tend his wounds and calmly await an ambulance. However, the townsfolk discover where Henry is hiding, and it seems all the men in the village, hell, all the men in the southwest of England, have arrived in thick tweed, sturdy boots with rifles and hip flasks, and ready to take out bloody revenge on Henry. Trucks and cars pull up, there's banging, shouting at the door, hysteria. Justice must be had! And no feeble intellectual American will keep it from this baying mob. Inside, behind the thick walls and doors, Amy screams, let them take him. But somehow, deep within him, pushed so far and not able to be pushed further, David draws his line in the sand, draws a line in his mind, in his conscience. I will not allow violence against this house. Still can't do the voice. The standoff now is prolonged, violent, bloody, as David is forced to take a stand to protect his wife Henry, his home, and his own sense of self, the drunken, bellowing mob of men begin to smash, to burn, to punch, and shoot their way through the house to beat bloody revenge out of Henry and out of David, should he stand in their way. Collectively holding our breath as an audience, the last 20 minutes we are shown in close-up, sweaty, teeth-bared mayhem what happens when men are pushed to the edge, when masculinity is threatened, when it becomes us versus them. Might meets right, and the two unstoppable forces of a small town's violent rage and a man driven insane with territorial vengeance meet in the Cornwall darkness with nothing but empty rifles, stove-boiled fat, glass shards, and a rusty bear trap between them. Almost like a West Country drunk version of Home Alone was remade by Quentin Tarantino. Blow for blow, it is an extraordinary confrontation, an almost animal hysteria as rage and panic meet hell's righteousness, and civilization, for a short bloody moment in the darkness, is suspended, and we are reminded somehow we are all mammals. Frightened, carnivorous mammals using tools, blades, rusty metal and glass to defend our lives and our beliefs. Not everybody gets out alive. Amy at one point is forced to take up a tearful shotgun. David forced to set aside the comforts of law and order and due process. And those who do survive are changed. In the dying moments of night as dawn seems to break, a blood-soaked, scratched-up David gets into his car to drive Henry back to the village. Henry says he doesn't know his way home. David, exhausted and lost and forever altered by who he has become, the blood on his hands and the smashed glass of his spectacles, says he doesn't either. Cut to black. Holy shit. So that was what happens over the 117 minutes or so of Sam Peckinpahs' home invasion chiller, very much putting the no, Jesus, no, into notorious filmmaking. How are you feeling? You okay? Need a brandy? Sit down maybe? A therapist? Was it worth my time? Will it be worth yours? Jesus, yes. It's Straw Dogs. For me, it's an absolute masterpiece of its type. Is its type any good? Well, we'll have to wait. Part 2, we'll take a look at the movie in detail, its creation, its creators, its impact, and its almost laughable back and forth through the British censors and classifiers who really had no idea how to sensibly deal with this, the hottest of hot Cornish potatoes. So, join me for that, part 2. I'll see you there.